please consider becoming a patron of MythVision Podcast. You'll get early access to every video, including this amazing one, and you can ask me personal questions, private message me, anything you'd like. We are MythVision. Welcome back to MythVision Podcast. Derek Lambert, your host. Ladies and gentlemen, Dr. Ronald Hendel is joining us today. Check out the book. Dr. John J. Collins actually gave me this copy, so I'm a lucky man. And that means Dr. Collins has been reading Dr. Hendel. And that tells you scholars pay attention to scholars. So I highly recommend you guys check out his work. His books are down in the description of this video, and you can get all that you want. Dr. Hendel, tell us something about yourself and the topic about giants today that we're going to be probing into.
Okay, well, I'm only about 6 feet tall, so I'm just a normal human being. But we're going to talk about giants in the Bible today who were considerably larger. So I'm just an ordinary professor of the Hebrew Bible at the University of California, Berkeley. And this is the stuff that I do, so it's kind of fun to talk about. I'm a teacher, I'm a writer, I'm a musician. That's it.
Awesome. So giants, it seems, how do I put this? When I look at the mythological Greco-Roman world, for example, and I see there's kind of these folk tales of these like really massive, large people. Enochian literature, almost has, I think, a 300-foot or some crazy massive sized giant. We know this is mythology, but we look at the Bible and we go, oh, no, that's not mythology. There's history to this. And there are people on YouTube, they get a hell of a lot more views than me. It upsets me. And they create these crazy fictional, we have 30-foot bones that we found of humans that were giants, and people actually believe in this. So we're not really addressing the fact that whether this is literally true or not. We're saying, yes, this is myth. But what does the Bible say about giants? And maybe what does antiquity have to say about the subject matter as it relates to the Bible?
Good. Yeah. Well, the people who are saying this, they're saying things that are similar to things that people were saying in biblical times. And so what we want to look at is the biblical testimony about giants and how that probably relates to things like 30 feet bones that you just mentioned. They had these in the ancient world, and they didn't know about dinosaurs, so they assumed that they were large people. So there are clues around, both in excavations, but also in landscapes, that make people think that there were giants once in the world. And we in modernity are skeptical of this, but we're a minority. Okay, most people are perfectly happy with giants. For example, if you go to Stonehenge, who built that? Who could build these huge stones into a big circle? So in traditional British folklore, one of the ideas is that Merlin was the architect, and he had these giants come and build the buildings, build Stonehenge for him. So this is kind of a natural, even kind of scientific inference from these things that are so large. In the Middle East, similar things happen. If you asked a peasant, an Egyptian peasant in the 19th century, who built the pyramids, he would have said giants, because after all, who could build such a large thing? There are also, stone structures like Stonehenge in the Middle East. And so some of these people traditionally refer to them as having been built by giants. So these are clues that are in the world, that are in the landscape, that are in ancient architecture, that are in old ruins. And so the idea that giants once roamed the earth is a kind of normal inference based on these kinds of clues. And so this is stuff that you find in the Bible as well. Now, if you want to look at the biography of these giants, it starts in a wonderful little passage in Genesis chapter 6. it's a strange little story. It says the sons of God were on the earth, and they saw the human women, and the human women were beautiful. And so they went down and had sex with them and took wives from them. And they made these mixed breed offspring, half human and half divine, who are called Nephilim. And these are called the heroes of old, the men of renown. Now, who the Nephilim are is obscure. Okay, it just says that these are the warriors of old, the men of renown, or the heroes of old, the men of renown. It sounds a little bit like Greek mythology.
Right.
Okay, so in Greek mythology, Zeus comes down and he's very horny and he has sex with lots of human women, and they bear these offspring who are heroes, like Hercules, for example. Hercules is big, strong, half human, half god. They're called demigods. Many of the heroes in the Trojan War, in Homer's Iliad, are of this mixed parentage, where one of their parents is a god and one of their parents is a human. Like Achilles, his mother was a goddess, his father was a king, a human king. And so Achilles, too, is a mixed creature, a demigod, half human, half divine. And so he's really large and he's really strong. So this sounds like this story of the sons of God and the daughters of humans in Genesis 6, that the gods have sex with human women, and their offspring are these mixed creatures who are giants. Now, it doesn't say in Genesis that they're giants. It just says that these are heroes and that they're called the Nephilim. But already by the time the Old Greek translation of the Hebrew Bible was made, the Greek translators translate Nephilim as giants, gigantes. So in the understanding of this story in ancient Israel, the idea developed that these mixed offspring were giants.
Right.
Now, as I said, it's not explicit in Genesis, but it says in Genesis that the Nephilim were on the earth in those days and also afterward. So there's a little bit of a clue there that the story of the Nephilim is not over yet, that you haven't heard the last of them. So you jump to the book of Numbers when you have the age of Moses and the Israelites, and they're wandering through the desert and they're coming up into the promised land. There's a wonderful little story in Numbers 13 and 14 where Moses sends some spies into the land, into the promised land, to spy it out so they can see if they go in to conquer them, will it be difficult, are these powerful people, and so forth. So he sends in this group of spies, and they spy out the land. And they come to a place where Moses sends them to, Hebron in the Judean highlands, and they come back and they say, we saw giants there. We saw the Nephilim there. We saw this other name, Anakim, and it's clear that they're talking about giants. Here's a description of what they report back to Moses. They say, we came to the land that you see which you sent us, and it is indeed flowing with milk and honey, and this is its fruit. And they have this huge fruit that they brought back from there, a single cluster of grapes that's on a big stick that two people have to carry. So the fruit is huge. It is flowing with milk and honey. This is its fruit. However, the people who live in this land are strong, and the cities are fortified and very great. And there we saw the children of Anak, and these are giants. They say there we also saw the Nephilim. The children of Anak are from the Nephilim, and we seemed in our eyes like grasshoppers, and so we seemed in their eyes. In other words, the Israelites look, in comparison to the Nephilim and the Anakim, like grasshoppers look to humans. That's the massive difference of stature. And so they are terrified. They come back and say, there's giants in the land. We can't defeat them. Okay.
I've heard people try to rationalize this too. I mean, I know you know all about it, being a scholar in this area, just in Hebrew studies, but there are people who go, well, that's just what would you use a technical term for something like that? It's just an analogy. They're saying that they're just really bigger than us. The Israelites are probably 5 foot tall, and these guys are probably 6'5". And so they're saying they're so much bigger than us, but that's an exaggeration of language is the way they would approach it.
Well, it is an analogy, but if you look like a grasshopper, if you look to someone else like a grasshopper looks to you,
right.
The point of the analogy is that they are huge.
Right.
Okay. And part of the analogy also is, to them, not only do we look like insects in stature, but if we went to war with them, they would step on us. They would destroy us as easily as we would destroy a grasshopper. And they would just crush us. I mean, literally, they'd step on us and crush us, and we don't have a chance against them.
Right.
Moses later says, the people who dwell, he says, it is a people greater and taller than us, and great cities fortified up to heaven. And there we saw the children of the Anakim. So the people report this to Moses, and Moses later repeats it. So Moses also thinks that these are greater, taller people, cities fortified up to heaven. That's pretty tall. Mm-hmm. Okay, we have what we call skyscrapers. So these are the ancient equivalent of skyscrapers, where these giant people live. Now, it doesn't say here how big they are, okay, but it does say elsewhere how big they are. There's another group called the Rephaim. There's another group called the Emim, the Zamzumim. There's all sorts of different groups of giants that inhabit the land of Canaan, the Judean highlands, like this region around Hebron. But in Ammon, there's ancestral giants. In Moab, there's ancestral giants. So on the east bank of the Jordan, west bank of the Jordan, all of these places had ancestral giants. Now, one of these giants that the Israelites come into conflict with is named Og, king of Bashan. And there's another little thing that says, Deuteronomy chapter 3, for only Og, this is Moses speaking, for only Og, king of Bashan, was left of the remnant of the Rephaim. Rephaim is one of the names of these giants. Behold his bed, an iron bed. Is it not in Rabat of the children of Ammon? 9 cubits is its length, and 4 cubits is its width, according to the common cubit. So here they say how tall they are. I mean, this is very clear. And a cubit, let me just see if I can remember. A cubit is like the length of your arm, so it's like 18 inches. So if if his bed is 9 cubits long, gosh, how tall is that?
So it's about 1.5 feet times 9.
Yeah, what is that?
So we got, what, 4.5?
14 feet long?
Huh?
Like 14 feet long or something?
It's pretty bad. Yeah, that's pretty big.
Oh yeah, here it is. Yeah, his bed is, I calculated. Yeah, it's roughly 13.5 feet long and 6 feet wide. Now that's bigger than a king size bed. 13 feet long and 6 feet wide. That's the size of a giant. Okay, so here we have an actual figure, which is kind of cool. Now, who's and notice that it says that his bed is still on display. Is it not in Rabat of the children of Ammon? Behold his bed. In other words, you can go see it. So Og, the king of Bashan, this giant, he's not there anymore. You can see his bed. There's a little display on the side of the road when you take the exit of Rabat of Ammon. This is the modern city of Amman in Jordan. You take the exit, there's a little sign there that says, pull off here to see Og's bed. 5 shekels gets you in. And you see it. And it's this huge thing that's 14 feet by 6 feet. And it says here it's made out of iron, which is kind of odd, because what there actually was in this region, in modern Jordan, in the region of Ammon and Moab and stuff, are these huge stone structures, megalithic structures that we call dolmens. And they're huge stones that are supported by stones underneath them. And traditionally in the Middle East, these are called the tables of giants, or sometimes the beds of giants. Okay, these are actually early Bronze Age burial chambers, but they're made with these massive stones that are roughly this size, 16 feet long by 6 feet wide, as is the big horizontal top capstone, and it's supported by two stones on the side. And in the early Bronze Age, people were buried underneath them. So they were burial chambers, and they were very monumental, and maybe for wealthy people or something like that. But there are literally thousands of them in the region of Jordan and northern Israel. Okay, so I think it's pretty clear that one of these huge dolmens was identified with the bed of King Og. Okay, and it's precisely because all of these dolmens are there that people took those as the evidence for these ancient giants. Now, one of the key things about these ancient giants is that by biblical times, or by the time these books are being written of the Bible, all the giants are dead. They're all gone. There aren't any more. You can go to Ammon and see Og's bed on display, but you can't see the giants anymore because they're all dead. And this is actually one of the resonances of their names. The name Nephilim literally means fallen one, which is an idiom for a dead person. Like in David's lament over King Saul and Jonathan, he says, "How the mighty have fallen, how the warriors have fallen," because Jonathan and Saul have fallen in battle. So the fallen ones literally means the dead people. Okay, so the Nephilim, these are giants who are all now dead. The Rephaim, another name for them, also has another meaning of the spirits of the dead. The spirits of the dead are called the Rephaim. So the Rephaim, who once were giants, are a subset of people who have died, and now they're Rephaim in the underworld, and now they're the spirits of the dead. So many of the terms for these giants are related to terms for people who are now dead.
I've actually heard.
This is the idea of who these ancient giants were, that they were the indigenous inhabitants of the land of Canaan. And all of the people who live there now have somehow displaced them or defeated them in one way or the other.
I've heard that in the ancient world, they believed earthquakes were due to the underworld Rephaim, if you will, or these giants that are in the dark in the underworld bumping into the walls from time to time. Is that true?
I haven't heard that about the Middle East. I haven't heard that about, I don't know that that's true about the ancient period that I study, but I wouldn't be surprised if it's part of, medieval folklore or something like that.
Yeah, that was something I heard. I can't remember the source. I think Dr. Robert Price mentioned that they thought, well, these earthquakes are because these either, it might have been titans in the Greek mythology or something, but somehow underneath the world, they're bumped into a wall because there's no lights down there. And it's like, oh, man.
That would, to me, that would make more sense for the Greek world and the Scandinavian mythology. I think I've heard that the giants are playing games or something like that in heaven, and so that makes earthquakes and things like that. I think you will find world folklore where you'll have ideas like that. And a lot of these cultures have giants. In American culture, do you know where the Great Lakes come from?
Yeah.
What?
You talking about the glaciers you talking about?
No, I'm actually talking about Paul Bunyan's ox.
Oh, okay.
And why there's so many lakes in Minnesota?
No, tell me.
Paul Bunyan's ox, what was his name? Big Red or something. I mean, he's a giant. Paul Bunyan's a giant, and his ox was a big giant, and the ox's footprints made all these lakes.
Oh my gosh.
So we have giants too in our folklore, and these are creatures that in particular, created aspects of the landscape. Giant lakes, giant formations, these are things that one attributes to giants. And so the ancient Near East was no different. When you had these massive stone structures these old, that they didn't know that they were early Bronze Age burial sites. They assumed that they were beds or tables of giants. Okay, and so this gives rise to some of these ideas. Let me tell you another thing in the landscape that gives rise to the ideas. I mentioned that when Moses sends out the scouts, they go to Hebron, to the region of the Judean highlands. A number of places in the Judean highlands, including Hebron, have these massive ruins of Middle Bronze Age cities that had huge fortified walls around them. Okay, so in the excavations at Hebron, they found these massive stone things. And these were, in the Middle Bronze Age, they were protective walls around the city. And they're really huge and they're wide, and so you can't get over them, you can't tunnel under them. This was the defensive architecture of the time. They used these huge stones that could be as much as 6 feet long to build these stones. Okay, and so when you see these stones today or in Israelite times, you say, how could anyone build these walls with stones that big? And so they called them, and this actually does, this comes from Greek mythology. Archaeologists to this day call them Cyclopean walls. Okay, because they're built with these massive stones. Do you know what the Cyclops are?
Cyclops?
Yeah.
Oh yeah, the one-eyed giants.
The one-eyed giants. So this practice of building these Cyclopean walls was also found in some of the old Greek cities, the Mycenaean cities, the walls of Mycenae, the walls of Tiryns. And when archaeologists discovered that, well, not when when the ancient Greeks saw these ruins of their old Greek sites, they said, oh, these must have been built by the Cyclops, by the giants. Okay, so Aristotle even says that the Cyclops built these great walls of Mycenae and Tiryns, all these old great Mycenaean cities that were in ruins at the time. So when archaeologists dig in Hebron and other biblical sites, even in Jerusalem, in Gath, in other places, they find these Cyclopean walls. They call them Cyclopean walls, which literally means they were built by giants. Okay, because Cyclops. So when ancient Israelites settled in the land of Israel and they would come to a place like Hebron, they would see these Cyclopean walls. And they said, oh my God, who could have built these? And the answer obviously is giants. And this is another clue in the landscape that gives rise to stories like Moses sending the spies, and they come back and say, look, these indigenous inhabitants of the land in Hebron and elsewhere are giants. So we can still to this day see the same stones that they saw, by which the idea arises that the original inhabitants of this place were giants.
Which gives like clear evidence to me as to why people still think when they look at this and they're puzzled at how they could have built some of these things, or how did they get that giant stone moved? It must be giants, because they can't imagine that there was an apparatus at that time that they could see a maneuvering clever way to leverage or use gravity to their advantage or whatever it might be. I've heard various theories, but they just can't. They almost neglect the critical scientific method on this and just say, no, you guys are ignoring the fact that these myths are true and there really were extremely strong. If not, why are these stories? I hear the same thing, and I don't want to rabbit trail about ancient aliens. They'll say stuff, well, the gods come from the heavens, therefore, duh, aliens, we see unidentified objects, blah, 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 all these claims. So they just like are validating their already preconceived notions about something that are just kind of working in their favor rather than using a scientific method, in my opinion.
Yes. Oh, that's absolutely true. But what I would emphasize is that they're doing the same things that people did in antiquity.
Right.
You see this stuff and you say, oh my God, I couldn't possibly lift a stone that big. It must have been a giant. In our technological world, we might not have that many people that believe in giants, although I think we actually do. I was in Northern California recently, and Bigfoot is this huge thing up there. He's a
Yeah.
giant. But a lot of people would prefer a kind of technological version of a giant, which would be an alien.
Right.
Someone with superhuman capabilities, superhuman strength, even superhuman technology, since we're a technologically oriented world. And so nowadays you have people talking about ancient astronauts, and it's aliens who built the pyramids, not giants who built the pyramids. But it's the same kind of explanation. It's not scientific,
Right.
but it's a kind of renewal of ancient folklore with a modern technological kind of coloring to it. So the people who say that are doing the same things that the people were doing in the Bible.
I love
these things, and they say this is evidence of ancient giants.
I love discovering this stuff and like just trying to unravel why people still do this. Let's get into, if you don't mind, let's get into David and Goliath, because Goliath seems to be this. I've heard some scholars say, well, no, it's one source says this, he was 9 foot, and another source says he was 6 foot something, if I'm not mistaken. Can you get into this? And was he considered a Raphaim, or what was he? And was he considered a giant?
Yes. So this is part of the same story. Okay. It says, let me find the passage here. Let's see. This is in the book of Joshua. Okay, it says in Joshua chapter 11. So to carry out this story, the spies, Moses sends the spies, they find giants in the land. But Moses and Caleb says we should go anyway because Yahweh, God, will defeat these giants for us. Okay, so we don't have to worry about them. But the Israelites are still terrified, and because they're terrified and saying, no, we won't go, Moses says, okay, you guys are bad. You're going to have to spend the rest of your life wandering in the wilderness, and it's going to be 40 years of wandering before we can enter this land. So the sins of the people are in listening to the spies and in refusing to enter into the Holy Land. So this is their big sin, is being afraid of these giants. Okay, that's why they have to keep wandering in the wilderness. So, but when they finally go in, Moses dies, Joshua comes along and leads the Israelites into the Promised Land. And they have all these battles at Jericho where the walls come tumbling down. Notice these massive walls again. And there are ruins of Cyclopean walls at Jericho. Okay, to this day, you can see them, and they're huge 6-foot-long stones piled up, huge. And so this again is a clue for the people who built these massive stones. Finally, Joshua defeats the Canaanite people, but also he defeats the giants who were there. And here's the passage where he does this in Joshua chapter 11. He says, at that time, Joshua came and cut off the Anakim from the hill country. That's one of the names of the giants. From Hebron, he mentions Hebron here. From Devir, from Anav, and from all the hill country of Judah, and from all the hill country of Israel, with their cities. Joshua eradicated them. So Joshua eradicated all the giants here. No Anakim remained in the land of the children of Israel. Okay, they're all wiped out. But there's a proviso here. Only in Gaza, Gath, and Ashdod did they remain. Well, Gath, there's still giants there. Okay, and guess who Goliath is? When we meet Goliath in 2 Samuel 21, it says David and his men killed 4 Philistine giants, who are the last of these giants. And it says these 4 were born to the Rapha in Gath. That's Rephaim. That's one of the names of the giants. And they fell by the hand of David and the hand of his servants. So in this story, in 2 Samuel 21, David and his men kill the last of the giants in Gath, okay, which is where there was one of the last enclaves. So all of the cities, all of the giants in Israelite territory were wiped out. But Gath and Gaza and Ashdod became Philistine cities. So they're outside of Israelite jurisdiction. So these are the last few pockets of the giants in Philistine areas.
Mm.
So where they kill, and one of these Philistine giants is named Goliath of Gath. So he's explicitly called one of the last of these giants. Now, the famous story about Goliath in 1 Samuel 17 has David going against Goliath single-handedly. And David kills him. Okay, and there he's called Goliath of Gath. It's the same guy. And he's huge. He's a giant. Okay, he's terrifying. There are different numbers in the Masoretic text and in the Septuagint and in the Dead Sea Scrolls. The Dead Sea Scrolls, we have one text that from the Dead Sea Scrolls that agrees with the Septuagint. So there's two different versions of how tall he was. Okay, he's either 9 feet tall or I forget what the other was, 7 feet tall, something like that. But either way, he's still a giant.
Right.
Okay. In the shorter version that's in the Septuagint and the Dead Sea Scrolls, he's the size of a couple of guys who are in the NBA Finals. Okay, he could be a center if he's 7 feet tall. So, but that's still pretty giant to most of us, and it would certainly be very giant to ancient Israelites. But if he's 9 feet tall, then he's even taller than Aden and the Greek Freak.
Yeah.
So this is Goliath. He's the last of these primordial indigenous giants in the land, and the glory of defeating him goes to King David. Okay, so he's dead too. The last of the giants is dead too. So Joshua killed most of them. David killed the last of them. This gives glory to Joshua and to David. This shows that, we're not afraid of giants. We can defeat them because God is on our side. And so, with these great, mighty adversaries, it shows the greatness of our own heroes. Let me give another version of this story, though. In the book of Amos, it says that God killed all the giants, that he didn't even need the Israelites to kill them. So there's different versions of how the giants met their end. In Amos chapter 2, God is speaking through the prophet Amos, and Amos says, in God's voice, "It was I who destroyed the Amorite before them." And here Amorite is a word that refers to the giants, "whose height is like the height of cedar trees, whose strength is like oak trees." Now, cedar trees were the tallest trees in the ancient world. These are the cedars of Lebanon, which are their version of our redwood trees. Okay, so they're huge trees, massive trees. So their height is like these, cedars of Lebanon, and their strength is like oak trees, which are the strongest trees. But I, Yahweh, destroyed them. I destroyed his fruit above and his roots below. So using the tree metaphor, I destroyed them, from the top to the bottom. And then it was I who brought you up from the land of Egypt. I led you in the desert for 40 years to inherit the land of the Amorite. So in this little vignette in Amos, God completely defeated the giants, which shows how great God is, that these massive, fearsome giants, God just crushes them like grasshoppers. And the Israelites just march in to take their land, which God gives them. So in this version in Amos, the Israelites don't even have to go to war against them. God just defeats them himself. And this is similar to what, there's a kind of undertone in some of these stories, the spy stories where Moses and Joshua said, when Moses and Caleb said, well, God will destroy them before us. So there's some versions where the Israelites don't even have to defeat them. It's clearest in Amos here, but there's a kind of substratum in the Pentateuchal stories where God just defeats them all and the Israelites just stroll in. So this shows where the Goliath thing comes in and what Amos is saying in the prophets. So we can draw out that the story of the conquest of these giants, these indigenous peoples of the land, was a widespread story and had different versions of it that we can see in these different texts.
and it had everything to do with trying to explain, in a sense, the geographical
Yes.
details, which I think is fascinating. It's just, it really is fascinating.
So the landscape has these built-in memories of the giants, just like, the Great Lakes is, if you're, living there 100 years ago, those are built-in clues of Paul Bunyan and his
If
big
I
eye.
may take us into this, you brought up an interesting point in Genesis 6. I personally love looking at the different sources that maybe even Genesis is drawing from. We know it comes from Mesopotamian lore, if you will. It's possible that if you look at Gilgamesh, for example, he seems to be a mighty, strong warrior type of person. Nimrod might have legendary Babylonian roots as some mighty warrior, possibly a giant. Here they're building structures to heaven. Is this a ziggurat? Is this how did you do that? Right? Obviously, these are massive images in our heads from the landscape. Whether it's exaggerated or not doesn't matter. The point is they're massive, something beyond what a normal civilization would build during that time, or at least during the time in which these are being written. And they're saying there's no way that's possible. But the mating of gods with, or somewhat Elohim, these divine ones, mating with humans, it makes me beg the question in Judges, looking at Samson. I can't help but think there's probably alternative theories of his birth narrative, because how does this guy get born with this long hair and he's killing 1,000 men with the jawbone of an ass, whether that's actually a hill, they say, that was called the jawbone of an ass, or an actual jawbone of an ass? It just, to me, that birth, like these abnormal characters seem to be divine or partially divine. Is there something here with Samson?
Yeah, I think so. Let me say that it doesn't just stem from Mesopotamian background, but the Greek background is important too. That all of these cultures were linked from in Mycenaean times, in the late Bronze Age period, in the Iron Age. All of these regions had contact with each other. They had trade relations. They had merchants going back and forth, and there's a continuity of some of these traditions. So the Mesopotamian to the east, the Greeks to the west, I think you have to count both of those in. Gilgamesh is a great example. He too is essentially a demigod. His mother was a goddess. His father was a king. Okay, this is like Achilles. His mother is a goddess. His father is a king. In one of the versions of Gilgamesh that we have that's written in ancient Hittite, they give the height of Gilgamesh, and if I recall correctly, he's something like 12 or 14 feet tall. He's massive.
Yeah,
he could sleep in King Og's bed. So Gilgamesh too is a giant, and he's a giant because he's a mixture of divine parentage and human parentage. So this is the same idea that we have with the Nephilim. The sons of gods are their daddies, human women are their mommies, and they are giants. And they're great mighty warriors, as is Gilgamesh, as is Achilles. So there's a continuity of traditions in the ancient world about these giants and about gods having children with humans and so forth, and creating these superhuman creatures. Gilgamesh's tragedy, the pathos of the Gilgamesh epic, is that even though he's this mighty giant and he's a mighty warrior, he's a mighty king, it says that he's 2/3 divine, 1/3 human. Now, I'm not sure they had the genetics quite correct there, but maybe the divine DNA is stronger than the human DNA. But even if he's 2/3 divine and 1/3 human, he still has to die because he has that mortal inheritance. And this is what the Gilgamesh epic is about. He wants to find the solution to death. He wants to overcome death. And the greatness of the story is, of course, because he's even partially mortal, he can't escape death. And this is what, I mean, this is kind of a spoiler alert, but this is what the Gilgamesh epic is all about and what makes it such a great epic, that he comes to terms with the fact that even he, the mighty Gilgamesh, will have to die someday. Now, the Samson story sounds a lot, in some respects, like the story of these other giants, like, for example, Hercules in Greek mythology. Samson is this hugely strong guy. At one point, he lifts up the gates of the city in order to escape from Gaza. This is one of the Philistine cities. Remember, this is one of the cities where there were still giants, according to one of these texts, the text in Joshua. So this is a city, to lift these huge gates made of these big stones. This really is a strong giant. He is like Hercules, okay? He's also kind of dumb, like Hercules is, okay? And he keeps falling for the wrong women, like Hercules does, okay? Now, interestingly, Samson is fighting against the Philistines. The Philistines were Greek peoples. Okay, so scholars have suggested that maybe, these Philistines who come from the Greek areas, maybe they brought stories about mighty giant warriors like Hercules, and then the Israelites get a hold of these stories, and so they make one of their own. So Samson, in many ways, has a kind of feel of a kind of Hercules character. So it might be because of that interaction with the Philistines. He's a version maybe of old Greek Hercules stories.
This is enjoyable. I love talking about this and just probing into these ideas. The idea of Samson being a giant, being a mighty warrior is clear in the narrative. And a lot of people will say, which came first, the chicken or the egg? Using that logic, to me, for example, the Mesopotamian stories are far older than the biblical story of creation and Genesis. It doesn't prove that the Samson one necessarily, is older or newer, and younger. But if you use that similar logic, it's very possible, like you said, that could be the case. It doesn't really matter to me, because either way, it's not, well, this one came first, therefore this one's truer. They're all legends. So whether you say that or not doesn't matter. But Samson's birth, something really crazy happens at his birth. His father and mother, they see God, and he's like, I'm alive. What the heck? Am I dead? And, like, no, you're alive. Like, we're still alive. I can't believe this. And I think there's some tradition there, like, you can't see God maybe, and live, or
yeah, well, it says that there's a tradition that you can't. What they actually see is an angel.
Okay,
and it's kind of a funny story, because Samson's mother figures out that he's an angel, but his father can't really get it through his head that it really is an angel until the angel turns into fire and goes up to heaven. He keeps saying, "Join us for this meal." He says, "I don't eat. I'm an angel." And he says, "What do you mean? Join us for a meal?" And he turns into fire and goes up. So it's a marvelous story that has a kind of divine intervention in facilitating the birth of Samson. Both of his parents are humans, though, so that makes him a little different from Gilgamesh. It makes him different from Hercules. It makes him different from the Nephilim. But there's a family resemblance among these creatures. And because of the divine intervention, this seems to somehow give him these superpowers. It's depicted in the stories that he's dedicated to God, and he's a Nazarite, which means you can't cut your hair and you can't drink liquor. So this is a kind of special religious office, a kind of special kind of monk, as it were. Not with the sex part, but with the alcohol and the hair part. And somehow that Nazarite office is connected with his superpowers. But it's a variation on a theme.
I thought it was interesting too. Like, if you take this approach, you can look in Greek and other cultures and see virgin births, or let me put it like this: what we would call virgin births. The gods coming down. Okay, let's give an example. Zeus.
Well, that's not
women.
virgin birth. That's actually having sex with a god.
So yes, let me put it like this. I think that's the point I'm getting at, is in the biblical narrative, Abraham, Sarah's not able to, she's barren. It gives you the hint in Genesis 12, she's barren. Hey, oh no, Genesis 11, hey, she can't have kids. Hint, hint, the narrative is going to tell you what's going to happen down the road. But in the biblical narrative, oftentimes it's a human having sex with a human. In the others, there's always a god involved in this act, which makes them somehow divine. But in the biblical, they do a little change. It's like they demythologize, it seems, the narrative to some degree, and say, well, God is the one who miraculously, made this happen. But it still didn't require a god having sex with a woman in order to have that happen.
Yeah, and these are special birth stories where the birth wasn't going to occur naturally, and so you have divine intervention. And the point is that there's different degrees and different kinds of divine intervention. I would add that that's not an Israelite innovation. It's not a biblical innovation as such, because we have some old Canaanite stories where we have the same sort of thing. We have two Canaanite epics, one the Epic of Kirta and the other the Epic of Akkad. And both of them begin with in one of them it's a king, and in another one he might be a king or he might just be kind of a prominent citizen, but they're not able to have children, or all their children have been wiped out and they can't have any more children. And so they appeal to the high god El, for a child. And El intervenes, a special divine intervention, and blesses them and says, now you will have a child. And then they have a child.
Huh.
Okay? And that child is destined for greatness, either to be the king or to be a hero or something like that. So that's the specific constellation of themes and motifs that you see in the Bible, in the patriarchal stories in particular. So this comes from the older Canaanite heritage, okay, that it's not the god having sex with a human woman to have this offspring, but it's the god blessing the human ability to have children. And so that's a kind of divine intervention. Now, let me say that this, in the Canaanite stuff, in one of the stories, this has to do with divine ideology. With royal ideology. That is to say, it's the king who's barren, who can't have children. And so the god facilitates him having a child. But in Canaanite royal ideology, the king was a kind of son of El, a son of the high god. And so this sonship of the king with the god makes a special relationship. Now, if you move over to Egyptian kingship, the king is a god. The king is the instantiation of the god Horus in the flesh. Mm-hmm. So it's a kind of divine incarnation kind of thing. So I would say that these are variations on a theme also, that the god can be incarnated in the human, or the god can sort of be a father figure to the human and give him blessings. And those are just variants of the same general idea that the gods are running the show, and that the birth of the child is kind of a divine event.
Dr. Hendel, I got one more question, because this is
now, and the birth of Christ in the New Testament is develops these themes in its own way. Right. But it's part of the same longer story.
I got one more, and because we can do lots of little details and get into all this stuff, but Genesis 3 comes to mind after you said Genesis 6, when we started with these giants and these sons of God come down from heaven, these divine ones with women. God curses man, woman, and the serpent. This serpent is obviously later interpreted as Satan, that great dragon, etc., based on Christian lore. However, in its original context, there's always interpretations of trying to understand what is the serpent here. This serpent will have seed. Its seed will have enmity between the man and the woman and itself, whatever that is. Is it just a snake on the ground and that's it? Because in the ancient world, they had a weird way of taxonomy, and snakes were just a bad thing. And they're like, no, bad snake. No, we're enemies with them. Or is there some type of lineage going on between the giants' descendants, etc., potentially linked to this serpent idea of a seed, and there's enmity between these divine ones' children? Because the serpent, I understood, I think it's what's the Hebrew word? Nakash. I can't remember.
Nachash.
Yeah, it can be understood as the resilient, or the something like it's not just a snake sometimes. Michael Heiser, by the way, I'm not a Christian. I just say I've heard him kind of interpret it this way, is like this could be kind of a seraphim, like what could this be?
Yeah, so let me just say, I think your first explanation is the right one.
Okay.
That it's a snake. But snakes, let me just say, factually speaking, snakes are terrifying.
Right.
Snakes are really, I mean, particularly if you ask my wife, snakes are just evil and terrifying things. And if you come upon one on the path where I ride my bike regularly, you don't want to go near it because it's a rattlesnake and it'll kill you. And it rattles at you. And it's a terrifying thing. So snakes are not your ordinary animal. Okay? And there's this enmity. My wife just hates them. I'm sort of intrigued by them myself, but I won't get too close. In the ancient world, there was a kind of folklore around snakes that they're both dangerous, but also sometimes they are healing. Remember that in the Bible, Moses in the wilderness, people are getting bit by poisonous snakes in the wilderness, and so he makes a staff with a golden snake, a statue of a snake on the top of it. He calls it Nehushtan, from the word nachash, which is snake. And holding up this staff wards off the snake, the danger of the snake bite. In Greek mythology, the logo of Asclepius, this is the patron of doctors, has the two snakes on it. So snakes are both deadly, but also in certain circumstances, if you use their images correctly, they can be healing as well, like Moses' Nehushtan. Now, let me tell you something else about snakes. It's very common for cultures to regard snakes as either immortal or perpetually youthful. Why is that? They shed their skin. Now, I'm in my 60s now. I would love to shed my skin and become your age and be perpetually youthful.
Right.
We can't do that, but snakes do that. They're old snakes, they shed their skin, and they're young again. This is part of what gives snakes their medical power, that they're able to overcome death.
So it's a strange taxonomy. It's like the observer who witnesses this is kind of interpreting this to go, they keep on like renewing their age because they look fresh and clean once they get rid of that old skin. They regenerate.
Now let me tell you one more clue here. In the Gilgamesh epic.
That's what I was going to get you to.
Okay. Yeah. Gilgamesh finally reaches the flood hero who lives off in the corner of the cosmos, who is the one person to whom the gods granted immortality. And the flood hero tells Gilgamesh, look, you're stuck, you're mortal. I can't reproduce those events. It was a one-time deal. I was in the right place at the right time and became immortal. But you can't do it. So go back home. But the flood hero's wife says, oh, give him something. He came this far. And so he gives Gilgamesh the plant of rejuvenation. And this is going to make Gilgamesh not conquer death, but be able to rejuvenate. But it's so hot when Gilgamesh is walking back to his boat, he sees a beautiful, cool little well, a little pool, and he goes swimming and leaves the plant of life by the side of the pool, and a snake comes by and eats it. What does the snake do? The snake sheds its skin and rejuvenates. And this is why snakes shed their skin and rejuvenate. And Gilgamesh is so pissed off, He said, I came this far and I had it in my hands, and the snake took it away from me. The snake robbed him of his chance at immortality. Now, notice that that's the same role, generally speaking, of the snake in the Garden of Eden story. He robbed the people of their chance at immortality. They no longer have a chance to eat the fruit of the tree of life and live forever. So the snake is a kind of trickster figure who tricks the humans out of their chance at living forever. It's the same motif or similar motif in the Garden of Eden story and in the Gilgamesh epic, and it solely has to do with this folklore understanding of the nature of snakes.
I wonder if there's more than just those two in antiquity about snakes and their I bet you there's more.
There's more.
And let me ask you this:
particularly close.
Let's poke Bible in this real quick, because you will crawl on your belly the rest of your life, the days of your life. Okay, was he not? I mean, some people go, before that he had arms and legs and could walk or whatever. That's one thing they'll say, and maybe you can address that. And number two is the common, your heel will bruise and you will crush his head. Is that just like the picture, like I'm standing up now, but it's like, hey, no, get out of here. Like you're stomping the snake's head. Is that all it is?
Yeah, that's what this is the Middle East. There's snakes all over the place, and they're going to bite you in the heel unless you smash them in the head.
Okay.
Yeah, that's why you carry a big stick when you're out walking in the desert, so you can whack the snakes before it whacks you. That's a very realistic picture of the enmity between people and snakes. Okay. Oh, and let me say, what was the other thing you asked?
Walking with arms and legs.
Oh, yeah. Yeah, it says, now, henceforth, you will crawl on your belly and eat dirt. Now, crawling on your belly is a gesture of servitude, of servility. When you bow down to the king, there's these wonderful expressions, I bow down to the king, I bow down to the earth 7 times, 7 times. So bowing down on the earth and crawling on your belly, this is shameful servility. Okay? And eating the dirt is the same thing. So this is a severe punishment for the snake. It's going to be, abasing itself because of this. And that's what snakes do. They crawl on the ground. So obviously before they weren't crawling on the ground, so they must have had legs. There's a picture of a snake-like creature called the Mushkhushu in Mesopotamian mythology. And they're pictured all along the gates and procession way of the Ishtar Gate, the famous Ishtar Gate, which is now in a museum in Berlin. And it's this big, long, reptilian, scary-looking snake thing with legs. So I think we actually have, pictures of, this is a kind of supernatural being, but it's a snake-like being with legs, which I think is what you imagine the snake looked like before this punishment.
Wow, ladies and gentlemen, I was looking at your cover to see if this snake was here, but no, this is a great image on the front of your book. In this book, Reading Genesis, is this where we can hear you discuss a lot more about this whole giant thing in some sense, or?
The giant thing is something I've addressed more recently. I have an article that just came out a few months ago about this. If you go to my academia.edu website, you can download my article about the giants. And there's a couple of pictures in it of some of these stone dolmens and stuff.
Well, you did fantastic. I have to say, I really enjoyed this show on giants and how it relates to ancient myth, ancient lore. I love these stories. They're stories though. I don't buy them ontologically or epistemologically. This is the truth and this literally happened. I just find it really interesting to kind of peek behind the curtain and see the magic trick that everybody believes literally historically as fundamentalist and go, oh no, this is really ancient explanations for why the world looks the way it is and it acts the way it does and why I'm afraid of that creature or whatever it might be. It's just brilliant.
And let me just say again, the Bible is much more interesting when you don't read it through a fundamentalist lens.
Wow. Ladies and gentlemen, go get the book. He's got Reading Genesis. He's got other books as well. on Amazon. I want to get that academia link. So if you send it to me, I could put it down in the description for people to go check out your articles and follow you on academia. This is brilliant. We're going to have more coming with Dr. Hendel, of course, but this is fantastic. Thank you for your time.
My pleasure.
And ladies and gentlemen, if you're crawling on your belly and you don't know your purpose, come check out MythVision Podcast. We are MythVision.